Gary Langness is well known to many of you in this room. I can only add just a little bit to that. I know, Gary, you have great friends here at Trinity and great friends here in Stillwater, and that a lot of this place helped shape you. But I can speak that what happened with Gary after Trinity and after Stillwater was that he shaped the church. And that Augustana and West St. Paul is well known for many, many things, many of which happened through Gary's leadership. And as I mentioned earlier, he was one of the pioneers in the partner relationship with the Iringa Diocese in Tanzania. Because of him, his partnership with many others, Tumaini University has come into being. And 60 congregations now have partner relationships like we do with Matasi. And there's just been blessing after blessing as those relationships, people to people, congregation to congregation, has just deepened over time. And I think it's an extension of how Gary sees the world. That this is about relationships and about connection and about gratitude and generosity. And so it's great to welcome you back here. I feel more like a new kid on the block, and that this is really partly your place because you grew up here more than it ever is my place. But I want to welcome you on behalf of Trinity. If you would welcome him.
Well, I bet you're excited to hear me. 7:30 at night. Is this a trick, Dan? How am I supposed to get on this on there? Okay, we got it. All right. Well, I want to tell you that it's been a long day for me. My wife and I got up this morning at 5 o'clock, and at 5:45 we were out the door to drive to Dawson, Minnesota, which is her home congregation and where we were married some 42 years ago, and I preached in that congregation, helping them with stewardship this morning. And then I drove all the way on the way out there, and Carol slept. And so on the way back, I said, Carol, I have a great and grand and glorious opportunity for you. And so she drove most of the way, and I slept. But it's good to be with you tonight, and it is the end of a long day for me, but I want to tell you, I am just excited about being here with you today. And you know, the whole theme that you folks are talking about tonight, and in fact, I thought to myself after I listened to Jeremy, and then I listened to Ann, I'm thinking to myself, what the world have these people been rifling through my notes to talk about the very things that I was going to talk about and which I will talk about. But I too want to say a word of thanks to Trinity Lutheran Church. And it's not the institution, but it is the people of the church. Let me say thank you to Trinity for a couple by the name of Reuben and Jean Jacobson. Reuben and Jean Jacobson were the ones that gave my mother and us kids a ride to church on cold winter mornings because we had no automobile. Let me say a word of thanks to Conrad Danielson, who served as Sunday school superintendent for 140 years. I can still remember Conrad. You know, he had those socks. Did you ever see him with his socks on and he rolled them down? It was something else. And he prayed too long, and us kids were always dinging around when Conrad was praying. But God bless him. He gave us a handle on the faith that we would never have gotten anyplace else. I say thanks to John Gallowitz. John Gallowitz was one of many, many Sunday school teachers, but he was the one, for whatever reason, the one that I kind of connected with. And the day that I was bucking another kid on my bicycle and we ran into a brand new Nash car there on Churchill Street, it was John Gallowitz that I went to say, John, I have a big problem because there's a big dent. And I have no money, and John Gallowitz took care of it. I say thanks to Trinity for Mrs. Kern. I don't even remember her first name.
Arlene.
Arlene, thank you very much. Thanks, Helen. Arlene Kern was the director of our Junior Missionary Society. And we would meet there on Saturday mornings at Trinity, and Arlene Kern would tell us about missionaries, and we would do little mission projects. I say thanks to Trinity for a guy by the name of Jim Nelson. He was a guard, a guard at Stillwater Prison, member of Trinity. He was the one that called my home every year when there was a father-son banquet and said, "Elma, can I take Gary to the father-son banquet? Because, you see, I did not have a father." I say thanks to Trinity for a wonderful, wonderful pastor by the name of Norm Wool, who nurtured my family and looked out for my family and gave me the encouragement to go to seminary and told me, "Gary, you can do this." I give thanks to Trinity Lutheran Church for an anonymous donor couple who gave me financial support to go to college and to seminary. And the list could go on and on and on, but I only have 2.5 hours. Only one negative. You got to take the bad with the good, too. Miami on our honeymoon. I was the youth director at Trinity in 1965 when Carol and I got married. A day or two after our honeymoon, we were asked, or we were told, to go with the youth of Trinity to Miami for a national youth convention. Not only were we told to go with the youth group from Trinity, but Carol and I were assigned to a whole railroad car of kids. I had just been married. I was more interested in getting to know Carol. Like Adam knew Eve. We were there for a week. I thought I'd never get that marriage consummated. So, I jumped in the swimming pool in Miami and got salt water up my nose and had a sinus infection the whole week, and it was one of the most miserable weeks of my whole life. And you folks owe me a honeymoon. Bali is what I have in mind. And I'm sure we can get a basket up here where you can put your offerings in on our honeymoon. Thank you, Trinity. But I want to thank somebody else. 1942. A young mother stood in the kitchen, surrounded by her 4 children, ages 5, 4, 3, and I was the youngest and best looking at one. And as she stood in that kitchen, the telephone rang, and on the other end of that telephone was Dr. Strand. Dr. Strand was the family physician, but Dr. Strand was also the county coroner. And Dr. Strand said, "Elma, I have some terrible, terrible news for you. Your husband has just been killed in an industrial accident in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan." There was $1,000 worth of life insurance, I'm told. It was enough to get my father's body into literally a pine box and be shipped home by rail to Stillwater. And my mother looked at her brood of kids and said, "What am I to do?" 1942, you see, Social Security had just barely begun. And what they paid out was just a pittance, certainly not enough to raise a family of 4 kids. It would have been possible to farm us kids out, because that's what you did, I think, back in those days. And we had relatives that lived on farms around Stillwater. But instead, she decided to keep us together. And so she had to go find a job. So she went to the state prison and she found an entry-level clerk typist position. And she worked there for 33 years. I think she had 2 goals that she talked about in her life. One had to do with us kids, that someday all 4 of us would be college graduates. It was almost the case. And that she would help us finish college debt-free. The second goal was that she could continue to be a generous giver to her local congregation, Trinity Lutheran Church in Stillwater. Good people, I want to tell you, we were very, very poor. I want to tell you, we were very, very rich. Because you see, Mom was a giver. And givers are always rich. And the first inkling I got from this was when I was about 5 or 6 years old. Mom's one extravagance was around Christmas time, when she used to just love to bake Christmas cookies. Not the big clunky kind, but the little dainty morsels that would just melt in your mouth. And she would make all kinds of varieties of those Christmas cookies and put them in big cans and put them out in the back hallway. And about a week or 2 prior to Christmas, she would take them out into the kitchen and she would lay out paper plates, and she would pile those paper plates with cookies of each variety that she had made. And she would put wax paper over them. Wax paper, for those of you who are too young to remember wax paper, was something that came before saran wrap. And she would put the wax paper over them and then stick toothpicks into the plate to hold them. And then she would look at us kids and say, "Come, we are going to bring some joy to the life of some old people." Now I want to tell you, I wasn't sure I even liked old people. And I knew for sure I didn't want to go visit them. And now I is one. But it was in the homes of those elderly people that we went that I didn't even know that I began to get the first glimpse of what it meant to be a joyful, generous, lavish, abundant giver. Because I saw the smiles on the face of my mother and upon the faces of the recipients. Come with me to 1956, I think it was. I was in 9th grade and Grandpa died. Grandpa had one of these great big old Nash sedan automobiles. It was very old and not very good. We had no car in our family. I was in 9th grade. Now folks, do you know what it's like for a 9th grader to have to walk around town with your mother? You see a 9th grader today in one of the malls in Stillwater walking with his or her parents. One of 2 things has happened. They're either in deep trouble or they're back asking for more money. Otherwise, they're 500 feet ahead of you or 500 feet behind you. Mom's sibling said, "Elma, you take the car. You don't have a car." And I'm thinking, yes, we're going to have an automobile in this car, in this family. And Mom said, "No. And I said, "No, Mom, how can you say no?" And she said, "Because I can't afford the gasoline and the taxes and the license plate and all the other expenses that go with an automobile, and still help you kids go to college and give generously to my church when I go on Sunday morning." And as a 9th grader, I began to understand that there was something very, very significant about giving and receiving and doing something about the priorities of your life. And then I went off to college. It was almost Thanksgiving. It was about this time of the year, just a couple of years later. And I can remember I was going to go home for Thanksgiving for the weekend. And as I was gathering my things up, there were some other guys in the dormitory. And I said, "Guys, where are you going for Thanksgiving?" And they said, "We're not going anywhere. We're just kind of hanging around here." "How come?" "Well, it's too far to go home, or we have no place to go." And I went to the telephone. I called. It was long distance in those days, Minneapolis to Stillwater. And I called and I said, "Mom, I'm coming home for Thanksgiving." She says, "Yeah, I know that." I said, "Mom, there's some guys here that have no place to go for Thanksgiving. Can I?" And before I could even get the words out of my mouth, she said, "Bring them home with you." I said, "Mom, there's a lot of them." She says, "How many are there?" I says, "Well, I think there are 5 or 6. She says, "Bring them." I says, "Mom, they're big. They eat a lot." And so they came on Thanksgiving Day to our home, and we sat around that Thanksgiving dinner table, and we laughed and we talked, and we heard their life story. And it was again that I began to understand the joy of sharing from the abundance that God had given to this poor, financially poor widow, but rich, rich woman. And so she taught us some things. One of the things she taught us was that it doesn't belong to us. It does not belong to us. From the first chapter of Genesis, God saw everything that God had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. Now, folks, I want to tell you that I have read that verse over and over and over again, hoping that it would say this, that God saw everything that God and Gary had made, and indeed it was very good. Because then you see I would be part owner. But it doesn't say that. The text says God made it. And so God is the owner. And I learned that at a very, very early age. Gary, you don't own it. You are simply the steward. You are the caretaker. You are the one to manage what God has given to you out of God's tremendous abundance. Good people, we don't own it. It's not ours. If you don't believe that, come with me back to your birth. You won't remember that, but somebody will. You came into this world bare butt naked. You had nothing when you came into this world. And when you go out the other end, you're going out with nothing. Now, some people say, well, if I can't take it with me, I'm not going. Oh, yes, you are. Oh, yes, you are. And so, our job as God's people is to be good stewards. You see, we are all stewards, either good or bad. We are called to be good stewards of the gifts that God has entrusted to our care in our lifetime between our birth and our death, and even beyond our death, because we leave a legacy. And my mom left a legacy. She has been dead for almost 14 years, and she still has me by the nape of the neck. But I treasure the things that she told me and taught me. And the second thing is, and Jeremy talked about the image of God in the 27th chapter, 27th verse of 1 Genesis. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. And do you know that part of that image that God has created you in is that of a giver? Do you know that God is the most abundant, lavish, joyful giver in all of creation? And do you imagine that God, when he pours down his abundant blessings upon us, that he sits upon some throne with a frown on his face, saying, I wish I didn't have to do this, but I guess I do? No! There is joy. There has got to be a smile 1,000,000 miles wide on the face of God as he bestows upon us these marvelous, marvelous gifts. And you and I have been created in the image of God. Do you know that you have a heart that is meant for giving? Oh, we fight that. And we think the stuff belongs to us. And we sometimes have a scarcity mentality instead of an abundant mentality. But we have a heart for giving. My hope and my prayer for you is that you pray each day that God will continue to instill in you that marvelous, marvelous gift of a generous heart. Because there is nothing that brings more joy and happiness in life than when one gives and learns to give with abandon, lavishly, in the name of Jesus Christ. And so, I wonder what you folks are going to do at Trinity to help move forward the mission and ministry of that marvelous congregation in the new year of 2008. I asked your pastor, Dan, I said, Dan, when does Trinity, when will you do the financial pledging, whatever you call it, in this congregation? I think you told me November 18th. So you got a couple of weeks from today, and that's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I wonder what you will do to help move forward the mission and the ministry that God has in mind for this congregation. The gifts of each and every individual in this room will make a difference in proclaiming the good news of a risen Christ. It is about your gift. It is about your heart. It is about the joy that you have as you give in a most generous, marvelous way. So how do you think about what your gift is going to be? I'd just like to suggest to you that there is a way to kind of put all of this into some kind of way of thinking. You know what comparative shopping is? You know, you're going to buy a car. You don't go to the first place and the sticker price says $24,995. Hey, sign me up, I'll take that one. You don't do that. You go around the other dealers. I have a little comparative shopping story for you. Carol sends me off to the store once in a while. In fact, quite often. And Carol makes a list for me. And she says, don't get creative. Just bring home what's on the list. What part of that don't you understand here? Okay. So one day she's sending me off to Target and to Rainbow. On Robert Street in West St. Paul, South Robert, Target is just across the street from Rainbow, okay? So she says you go to Target first, and these are the things that you get at Target. And one of the things that you get at Target is a refill of Dial liquid soap. Huh? Comes in a container like that. You know what I mean. And of course, I'm a little bit of a smart aleck. And I say, well, Carol, why wouldn't I get that at Rainbow? She looks at me with a little bit of disgust, and she says, because it's cheaper at Target, get it at Target. Thank you very much, I'll get it at Target. So off I go. And I get my things at Target, and I come across this Dial soap, this container, and I buy it. You know what it costs? $5.99. Get done with that, get done with Target, drive across the street, go over to Rainbow to get the things I'm going to get at Rainbow, and I get all those things in my cart, and then I do what a guy should never do. You know what I did? You bet, you go buy the Dial soap, right? $4.99. I want to tell you, I could hardly wait to get home. So I get home and I walk in and I said, Carol! I said, I got some news for you. I just paid $5.99 for this at Target. Yeah? Cost $4.99 at Rainbow. Why didn't you take it back? Now you see, men and women are laughing for different reasons. Men don't do that. Women would. So now you got it, comparable shopping. I want to talk with you now about comparable giving. I have a friend by the name of Pastor Harris Lee. He has a wonderful wife by the name of Marion. Harris is older than me. It's hard for me to believe that anybody older than me can still be alive, but he is. And he told me that one day, after he had retired, his wife Marion said to him, Harris, come with me, I want to go buy a new bedspread. Now Harris is not the kind of guy that wants to go buy a new bedspread, let me tell you. I don't think he'd ever been shopping with his wife in his life. But he said, I guess that's what you do when you're retired. You go with your wife to buy a bedspread. So he did. They went to Dayton's or wherever it was. And they get up to the bedspread department, and she picks out the one she needs. And Harris looks at me and he says, Gary, do you know how much a bedspread costs? Now, this is a guy that doesn't have a clue about anything. $250, he said. He said, I almost had the big one right there in Dayton. Well, we got the bedspread because Marion wanted it, and Marion's been a great wife, he said, and so off we go to home. Marion's in the bedroom putting the new bedspread on the bed, and she's just smiling from ear to ear, and I don't know what to do with myself. So I walk out into the kitchen and I sit down at the little desk that we have out there, and I look up and I see, my eyes sees our World Hunger offering envelope pinned up there that we're going to give on Sunday. And I reach up and I take it down, he says, and I look at it, and it says $100. And then he says, I get up from my chair and I walk into the bedroom and I said, Marion, look at this. And she said, yes. And he said, Marion, we have just spent $250 for a bedspread. And this is our offering envelope for World Hunger that we're going to give to our church this Sunday. And we have a check in there for $100. It isn't right. And Marion looks at Harris and smiles and says, Harris, go do what you want to do. And Harris goes back to the desk, opens up the envelope, takes out the check, tears it up, and writes out a check for $300. Comparable giving. Comparable giving. How do we make decisions about how generous and lavish we are going to allow our hearts to be? And from that generosity comes joy beyond belief. Carol gets to do all the fun things in our house. She only lets me do a few things. She insists on doing the laundry and the cooking and the dishes, cutting the grass, fixing the plumbing. But she lets me write out the giving checks because she knows I just enjoy it so much. Sitting there at the kitchen table and writing out the checks to give away. It's easy. It doesn't belong to me. It's not mine. And I love to do it. And why I want you folks to have a generous heart? Because I want you to come to know, if you don't already know, the tremendous joy that comes from giving with abandon. God does provide. God does give us all we need and even more. I close by telling you that in 1993, my mom was dying of cancer. She had had cancer for now about a year. She was wasting away inch by inch and pound by pound. It was about October or November when I thought, she's not going to live much longer now, and so on Wednesday afternoons, I made it a point to leave my office at Augustine in West St. Paul, say to the secretary, I'm going to Stillwater to see my mom. I'd drive to Stillwater. I would let myself into her apartment. I would walk into her bedroom where she was most of the time at that time, heavily medicated for pain. And I would sit down in the chair by her bed, waiting for her to wake up. Sometimes I sat there for 5 minutes, sometimes it was a half an hour. But pretty soon she would open her eyes, and when she opened her eyes, we would visit. Oh, we had some marvelous visits. We talked about the good old days. We talked about the future. We talked about things that I could have done better in my life. We talked about some things she could have done better in her life. We laughed, we cried. At the end of that first Wednesday visit, she said to me, Gary, let's have devotions. This was, you have to understand, the woman who taught me how to pray. I do not remember a day that I did not know how to pray. In fact, she said to me one day, she said, Gary, do you know that I have prayed for you every day of your life, and even before you were born, I prayed for you. This is the woman that taught me how to read the scriptures. And because she had taught me how to read the scriptures and she had taught me how to pray, I knew how to do those things now when she was dying. So I said, Mom, what would you like for me to read for you today? She said, Psalm 23. So I read Psalm 23 and we prayed. I got up, gave her a kiss, told her I loved her, said, I'll see you next week, and off I went. Next Wednesday came, same routine. At the end of our visit, I said, Mom, what would you like for me to read for you today? Psalm 23. And so I read Psalm 23. When I got done, we prayed, told her I loved her, gave her a kiss, and off I went. Week number 3, it happened again. Week number 4, it happened again. Week number 5, I said, Mom, what would you like for me to read for you today? And she said, Psalm 23. I was still a smart aleck, and I looked at her and I said, Mom, this is a woman who has read her Bible through and through many, many times. I said, Mom, has it ever occurred to you that there's something else in Scripture except Psalm 23? And she almost rose off the bed with those deep, penetrating Norwegian eyes and said, Psalm 23. So I read Psalm 23. And then we prayed. And when I was done, I said, Mom, tell me, what about Psalm 23? How come we always read Psalm 23? And she said to me, Gary, because when you kids were little, and I did not know how I was going to make it for one more day, the Lord was all I had. And then she said, and he was enough. Good people, he is enough. And the good news of a risen Christ needs to be proclaimed in the St. Croix Valley, in the state of Minnesota, in the good old US of A, and in the world. And I am asking you to allow your heart to overflow with generosity, to make a difference in your own life, in the life of your congregation, and in the life of this world that is broken and hurting and needs to hear the good news of a risen Christ. Thanks for what you have done. Thanks for what you are doing. But thank you for what I know you will do in the days that are to come. And for that, I say, thanks be to God.
Well, what a sweet time. And Gary, thank you. That had so many blessings in it. Just thank you for being with us today. And thank you for being who you are. We've had a great night together. I hope you really enjoyed it. And I hope you, on your way home, have a joyful homecoming tonight. I hope you remember this night with a great deal of fondness. Thank you for being brothers and sisters in Christ, and for us to be God's people here together. We've asked Annie to help us sing the doxology tonight. Is that right? And then we will be on our way. So look forward to seeing you again on Sunday. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, I'm looking forward to the good old-fashioned 4-part Lutheran harmony. All right, basses, get ready. Here we go. Praise God from whom all blessings